Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another exciting episode of The Inside Factor, where we give you uncensored and unfiltered news. South Africa is a country filled with the working class, where every single morning they wake up every single morning to go to the taxi ranks and stand in your long lines. Transport is a very integral part of our economy, one which moves us from our part of society to another part of society. Well, I'm not joined alone today. I'm with my co-host, Thabo Makwakwa.
Thank you very much, Modibe, for that beautiful opening. Yes, indeed, my name is Thabo Makwakwa, and this is the Inside Factor. Today, we're not alone. We're one of the most controversial people in the country. He's been on your screens, your newspapers, everywhere on the radio, in the media. You would know him as Lucky Montana, a Gupta boy, a corrupt individual. On the Inside Factor, we know him as Tsepo Lucky Montana. And today, he shares his side of the story. Tsepo Lucky Montana, welcome to the Inside Factor.
Well, thanks very much. Thanks for inviting me. I think this is an exciting project. I think the Inside Factor, I don't think you guys recognize or realize the critical role that it will play in a changing South Africa. We need many voices to be heard. And I think that your initiative is going to give voice to the voiceless. It's going to make sure that we've got different perspectives about our country. So yes, I'm excited. Thanks for the invitation, and I'm happy to be here. Well, the invitation, or rather the introduction, is a controversial. I'll tell you, if you speak to my family, my own children, they see a daddy, a brother, and we tend sometimes to not to dwell much into what we read about us, because sometimes I watch the news. And I ask myself, the person that is being described there, is it me? Because people, of course, they don't go into understanding who we are, where we come from. And I'm quite pleased today that the Inside Factor is in fact giving me the platform to be able to share my own story, tell the story of South Africa, where I come from, my own experience, and yeah, look at developments in the country. Thank you very much.
Now, Mr. Montana, you've talked about how your children look at a father when they see you instead of what they read and what they see on TV. Now, take me back to your childhood and your activism during school.
Well, I grew up in Mamelodi. Mamelodi is a township in the east of Pretoria. I grew up in the dusty streets there, playing soccer, of course, like many of the young people. My biggest team that I grew supporting, which I still support to this very day, is the mighty Kaizer Chiefs. And you won't believe it, I learned soccer not from my dad or from my brothers, but from my mom. So she taught me everything about Kaizer Chiefs. When I was 5, 6 years, my mom still used to go to the soccer stadium. And every time she left, or there's a combi or a taxi coming to pick her up from home to go to Orlando Stadium, as she was leaving in that car, I would run in the streets, roll on the floor, and they have to come back to take me back so they say, no, prepare yourself, you must come with us. So my late mom, is gone now, and I said, even when I was bidding her farewell, that she taught me football, she taught me about the mighty Kaizer Chiefs. I thought I'd be playing football, I'd play for Chiefs. It didn't happen, and of course, came the 1980s. And we know what happened in the country, South Africa. There's not a black child who was not affected by events in 1983, 1984, 85. And I got involved in our struggle for freedom, and I was never to look back. I gave all of myself to the liberation struggle. I got involved. Interesting enough is that one of the major events, two major events that had a massive impact on my own political outlook. In 1985, there was a massacre in Mamelodi. The police killed over 21 people who marched against the local government system under apartheid, calling for reduced rent, proper services, and all of those things. My grandmother participated in that march. I went with her in that march. I saw when the police shot people during that event. It had a major impact. I never looked back. But 2 years down the line, 2 years later, I think it was in 1987, I met someone if I recall his name, Patrick Mpaho. This man was a regional organizer of the South African Railway and Harbours Workers Union. He came from Limpopo's Kukune region, and he rented a back room at my grandfather's house. We became friends, we became close comrades, and when the 1987 railway strike happened, I joined them, I worked with them. We sabotaged the railway system, by the way, at that time, in support of the striking workers under the South African Railway and Harbours Union, SARU. And of course, thereafter, myself, Patrick Mpaho and his wife, we were on the run because the police, the security branch were looking for us in Pretoria. We left Pretoria, the Pretoria Council of Churches, which is under the South African Council of Churches, in fact gave us money to go underground. And that's how we worked until 1990 when the ANC was unbanned. So I lost almost 15 years of my youth being involved in the struggle for freedom. And I've never looked back. I've been a member of the African National Congress since I joined one of its underground units in 1987, 1988. I did work there, quite a lot of mass work, propaganda work, distributing pamphlets, recruiting some of the key people in the townships in Mamelodi. And so I was active, and I've never looked back. I don't regret anything, except that I would have loved to join politics after I've played for Kaizer Chiefs, but that was never to be.
Growing up in Mamelodi, one would expect you to fully support Mamelodi, Sundowns, because a lot of people hailing from that part of Gauteng are big fans of the club. But anyway, it's good to know that you decided to support Amakosi. Now, it sounds like you have had quite an impactful youthhood growing up, looking at the activism and the role that you played during the dark days of the struggle. So here's a boy from Mamelodi growing up in not such conducive space to become one of the most key players in our economy in regards to PRASA, where you were Group CEO. So Ceo Lucky Montana gets appointed as the Group CEO of PRASA in 2010. Can you take us through that? And I understand you resigned in 2015.
Well, yes, I think I came to railways indirectly. I studied at the University of Cape Town. After I did an honors at the University of Cape Town, I joined the Department of Economic Affairs and RDP. It was a new department. I was part of what we call strategic management team in the Western Cape. So under Dr. Alan Busak, I joined that team. And of course, I was responsible for RDP planning and RDP coordination. This is 1994 until 1995. I served for that period. And it was not easy because I came there as an ANC researcher. But the ANC lost the elections in the Western Cape in 1994. So we had a government that was run by under the premier at that time was Herna Skrill. And the ANC, out of the 10 MECs, it had only had 4. So I worked in the Department of Economic Affairs. But during that time, something important happened. There was an opportunity to go abroad to study. And Dr. Alan Busak sent me to the Netherlands, together with a group of about 25 South Africans, young South Africans, to be trained in a program called Economic Policy Formulation. That program focused on a whole range of things about the economy. But the most important thing was to prepare us, how do we support economic decision makers? How do we collate economic data, put it together so that economic decision making in a democratic South Africa is sound, is informed, is done on a more rational basis. How do you put together what we call policy papers? I did that program. At the end of that program, you had to submit a policy paper on one part of the economy. So I focused on industrial policy. So I wrote a policy paper on industrial policy for post-apartheid South Africa. When I came back, I moved from the Department of Economic Affairs to join Minister Jeff Adebe in the Department of Public Works. Again, there, big opportunity, because I think a lot of people do not understand the importance of public works in the delivery of infrastructure, in the management of assets of the state, but in job creation, particularly if you look at one aspect of public works, is to the construction industry. And at that time, we're busy with the Construction Industry Development Board. I was sent on to another important program, which was called the Construction Management Program, which was run by University of Stellenbosch, University jointly with the University of Pretoria, University of Cape Town, and VETS. I did that for a while. I completed that program. And of course, after elections in 1999, Jeff Hadebe was appointed the new Minister of Public Enterprises. I went to that. That was a major turning point because at Public Enterprises at that time, it was not a department, it was an office of Public Enterprises. But I think the president at that time, President Beki, and the cabinet took a decision that the department should be elevated, it should become a fully fledged department rather than an office, and that we must unlock the value of our own state-owned enterprises. And at that time, we had to deal with Transnet, we had to deal with Eskom, we had to deal with Dinel, we had to deal with Safcol, Aventura, and of course Alexco. I got involved on the transport side with the restructuring of Transnet, more specifically the rail side and the port side of things. There was a body called the National Framework Agreement, which was an agreement between government and labor, basically a consultation mechanisms on how to restructure the different state entities. That's how I got so much involved, other than the training that I did in the Netherlands, which also dealt with transport regulations. I did quite a lot on both the transport and the energy restructuring side of things. And the decision to create PRASA, even though we didn't know the name at that time, was taken in 2001 when we were busy restructuring Transnet. We're looking at the future of Transnet. We're looking at Spoornet at that time. And a decision was made that we need to separate freight logistics from passenger, and that the passenger services must be subsidized, and that we needed to create a new entity under the Minister of Transport. We didn't know the name, so the decision was made in 2001. When I joined the Department of Transport in 2004, Minister Hadebe then said, we must implement the decision that we made, and to consolidate all passenger rail entities into one. We started with that process in 2004, and in 2009, we created PRASA. So it took us a decade to plan and do all sorts of preparations to create the PRASA that we know. It's a new baby, it's a new entity. Yes, inside PRASA there are a number of entities that are very old, like Metro Rail and all of those things. But as a corporate entity, it's a new entity that we created over a period of a decade. And I'm quite pleased that I was part of the process for planning, policy, evolution, and ultimately the launch, and I became the first CEO of the Passenger Rail Agency of South Africa. I didn't prefer the name PRASA. The Department of Transport, my colleagues, preferred that name. I thought we at a more strategic level, we wanted to create what we call a public transport agency, what in short we'll call a PTA, because not only will it run railways and buses, but it will also assist smaller municipalities and rural districts to run transport. But ultimately, at the policy level, said we needed a much narrower, focused entity that we call the Passenger Rail Agency of South Africa. And it has been, I think, the knowledge, the expertise, the experience that I gained from, when we created PRASA, it was not an easy thing. One of the major things, for example, is that the unions at that time were worried that they're going to lose their benefits if we transfer them from Transnet into this new entity. We had to negotiate all of that. There are assets that belong to Transnet, others that belong to the old South African Rail Commuter Corporation. We had to restructure all of those assets. We had to create new institutions, new policies, because you're bringing entities from different backgrounds and different policies, different procurement policies, different HR policies. You have to bring all of those and create new the reporting systems, financial systems, the IT systems. So the consolidation process, it took us a decade. What saddens me today, though, is to see PRASA being destroyed when it has taken us a lot of time, a lot of effort to create it. And we are destroying it not just as an entity. We had begun a new cycle of investment. Over 100 billion rands has been put. And today when I look back, we can't show anything for that investment, precisely because there are all sorts of battles, there's a lot of instability, and I think that we need to change and end all of that.
Look, you've come out very openly talking about the privatization of certain SOEs. And I'm listening at your story, how you're walking us through you being behind the scenes, how you grew up in that organization, how you were behind the policy and the direction of that policy, to now come back as an ordinary South African to look at what's happening at that organization today. Do you think that privatization is the correct way to go about it?
No. Privatization for, you've got freight rails, freight transport. All over the world, freight transport pays for itself. It pays for itself because it generates the volumes. If you look at the freight lines, for example, they carry volumes of whether coal or iron ore and other general freight which moves onto the network. Cars that are being exported, for example, from Roslyn through the port of Durban, they generate their own volumes. Passenger services are different because if you look at the cost of rail, you pay quite a lot, over 50 million per kilometer. And if you were to pay, you were to recover that money from a passenger, the cost of transport will go up. Let's take the How train as a good example. A lot of people think the How train runs efficiently because the private sector paid for it. No, out of the 30 billion rands to create the How train, the state paid 27 billion rands out of that. The private sector only invested 3 billion rands. So when me and you get onto the How train and we pay for a ticket, we don't pay the cost of that infrastructure. We only pay for the operating cost, the cost of the 3 billion rand that the private sector had put and must recover over a period during the concession period of 15 years. Just imagine if today were to say your ticket price must reflect both the cost of infrastructure as well as the cost of operations. It means the cost of the How train will not be affordable. So the state put the 27 billion rands. But what does the state want? It wants a return, but not in a form of profits, not in a form of dividends. It wants a return in a form of efficiencies, in a form of a more efficient transport, in making sure that more people leave their cars at the station at home and get into public transport. Because an efficient public transport is key to the productivity of our own economy. An efficient transport is key to making sure that we move passengers, we move goods more quicker, more efficiently. An efficient transport, because if you look at public transport, is better than private cars. It creates livable cities. Trains, for example, compared to cars, buses or aeroplanes, they create a much more cleaner environment. But in a country like South Africa, where you've had massive inequalities under apartheid, the special, if you look at the railways, 2 tracks, but the numbers that they move, if you take Mabopane line, or you take Naledi line, or you take the Pinasport line, that one line, it takes one train would move with almost 2,000 people. How many taxis, how many buses would you require on the roadside? And the space that it requires to build the railway lines is not massive. We keep on building highways. The Ben-Schoeman highway, we keep on expanding the lanes. It's not efficient for one person to be traveling onto that. The cost to the economy, the cost to the environment is quite huge. So yes, it's very important, but to answer your question in a direct way, if you privatize or you concession railways, passenger railways, and with the structure that we have of apartheid, the private sector will not be able to recoup its investment. That's the first issue. You are going to require the government to invest a lot of money in a form of a patronage guarantee, which is what the Gauteng provincial government pays to the Bombela concession, which runs the Gauteng. So the costs are huge. So yes, there is a space if you want to build new railway lines, particularly high-speed lines. The private sector has got an important role to play. But the current commuter rail system, you can't privatize it because the volumes will not support the privatization or concession of any of these lines. And I wrote a paper emphasizing the interdependence of these lines. If you privatize or you concession lines in Gauteng and the Western Cape where the volumes are relatively high, you have to close it down in the Eastern Cape. If you privatize the KwaMashu, Durban, Umlazi line, which is what you call the north-south line, you won't run services to either the south coast or to the north coast of KwaZulu-Natal. It's as simple as that. So the volumes are not right. I think that we need about a decade where we upgrade the commuter rail system, complete the work that we've started. We bought new modern trains. The trains that we bought for Metro Rail are modern trains. They're equivalent, if not better than the Gautrain trains. If we build onto that, we introduce the modern signaling system, it means more and more people will start to use public transport. And I think the benefits, the final point I want to make is that the privatization and concessioning of railway lines is a European experience. Why in Europe does it work? Because they've got smaller cities and they've got densities. We don't have the densities. And that is why you find that in the morning peak, a train goes that way, a bus that goes that way, and then what does it do? It doesn't go back, it parks there. We've got a lot of these assets, buses, trains, taxis that are parked during the day because the volumes do not allow it. Whereas if you go to a European underground system, continuously there's movement because of the densities, it allows that. So it means we cannot just only modernize railways without increasing the densities. We cannot run a sustainable commuter rail system without restructuring road-based transport. I hear the Minister of Transport now, he hosted a taxi in Daba. I followed that very closely. But the issue about railways is not only about, or rather about taxis. It's not about formalization. It's to make sure that you actually restructure the nature of taxi operations. There are routes where taxis should not be operating, and there are routes where taxis should be operating. There are routes where you don't want to build railways. There are routes where you want to build railways. There are routes where you want the bus. There are routes where you don't want the bus. So you need to achieve what you call modal efficiencies. You need to deploy the right mode so that you can generate the income, you can generate the revenues, so that the system can recapitalize itself. The current system that we have, the railways cannot recapitalize themselves. The taxis cannot recapitalize themselves. So formalizing the transport sector without restructuring it fundamentally, I tried to do that when I was the Deputy Director General of Transport. I even said to the taxi guys, who owns a route? Because it's very important. The route doesn't belong to the taxi operators. It actually belongs to the public. It must be regulated and licensed by government. But government is afraid to discuss that openly with the taxi industry. We need to ask, do you want a 16-seater to move from Bara to Durban? It's not efficient. The only way you can make money there is only if you come, use violence, and stop other operators. But equally, if you go to Port Elizabeth, if the rail system moves 5,000 people, it's quite clear that that route is not a train route. The numbers are too low for railways. But if you go to Mabopane, you've got between 50 and 60,000 people moving in the peak hour. Clearly that you can see that you can't put many taxis and buses there. The railways are the most efficient way of moving people. So you'll see that A transport system is based on the interdependencies. They support each other, but transport planners, transport operators must make sure that they deploy the right mode where it's required. Maybe in future, we may need to concession or privatize, but I don't see that happening in the next decade, because if we were to do that under the current circumstances, the cost to the public would be huge. Government will be forced to pay, to subsidize the operators in the form of a patronage guarantee. Do we want that? The experience on the Gautrain suggests that that's not the route that we want to take. Other people are saying, let's expand the Gautrain. Yes, we must expand the Gautrain in the country, in the province here, because the Gautrain economy, what we call the city region of Gautrain, requires a modern system. But we'll see that we don't want to expand the Gautrain under the current circumstances, because if you extend the terms of the current contract, then it doesn't work in the public interest. That is one thing that we must do. Secondly, we need to build what we call an integrated network. What it means is that there are areas where you need to expand the Gautrain, but there are areas where you need to modernize and expand metro rail. These things, they complement each other. There are areas and routes where you need to strengthen the taxi industry. I mean, one of the things that I don't understand, which I've been fighting for all these years, we have Gautrain buses that move empty. There's no reason why that service cannot be run by taxi industry to fit into both Gautrain and metro rail. There's no reason why you don't allow the current bus system, commuter bus system that is highly subsidized, and you don't allow the taxi industry to take over that. And then but you put clear licensing conditions that we are giving it to you as a taxi industry, but run this with a 23 seaters or 30 seaters, not with a 16-seater, because it's not efficient to do that. And the taxi industry, I think there are huge opportunities. I mean, let's look now at the introduction of electric cars. You know, if the taxi industry start to make a shift, actually that they'll own a big part of the economy. And I urge them to look at these opportunities. But I think that we tend not to sequence our strategies in the right way. The strategy to privatize or to concession certain railway lines must come at the end if that's what we're going to do. If we start with it today, it will never work. And I would urge the Minister of Transport to look at that. He said in one of his speeches now to say, he argued that we want to only concession the what you call branch lines. But I don't think we also understand what we're talking about. Branch lines, some of these branch lines are not viable. It's a line that the apartheid government built to support a farm or a group of farmers there. You can't concession them to anyone. There are those that you can concession only if the return and the cost of operating those lines are not huge. So you need to do a proper due diligence exercises. You need to ensure that we deal with those things properly. If you concession, you look at that in isolation, or you formalize the taxi industry in that way, we are not going to succeed. And I'm hoping that I'm confident that the Minister of Transport will look at these things in a way, sequence the strategy, get the complementaries right, so that the numbers can support the system. But as things stand right now, you privatize any of these lines, the private sector will not get the return on this investment. And I would advise against doing that at this early stage. Take 7 to 10 years, restructure railways, introduce measures to control cars on the highways and on some of our key routes, so that people move on to the thing. Anyway, the Gautrain is based on that. Yes, people saying, scrap the e-tolls. But the provincial government is not being honest with us. When the Gautrain was created, it was created on the assumption that the provincial government will introduce measures to control the movement of private cars in favor of public transport, because we can't subsidize the Gautrain and subsidize cars. We can't do both. We are a developing country. We can't afford both of those things. So I think that I'm giving you a number of reasons why it will not be correct for us to do that at this stage. And I hope that our policy makers within government can look at this properly and we sequence our strategies in the right way. I'm not raising that as a criticism, but I'm speaking from my own experience and studying railway operations all over the world, where the numbers do not support that. Don't do that. Build the numbers, modernize, and make the system more attractive so that by the time you bring the private sector, government doesn't have to pay the private sector. They can easily recoup their money from operations. They generate revenues from operations rather than from a patronage guarantee, as we are currently doing with the Gautrain.
Now, with regards to the locomotives, when you were part of PRASA, there was this new wave of we're going to modernize our system. Where did we go wrong?
Well, we didn't go wrong. And I know people will say he's defensive because he was there. We introduced a very ambitious railway program. When I left PRASA, we were on the verge. Actually, I used the word, we're on the threshold of a major railway revolution in the country. We had bought new commuter trains. You saw the president going to Ekurhuleni in Niger to open the factory. This was part of our investment. It was not done. I've seen the Minister of Transport saying we're going to open up a new factory. The new factory was done by us. It was part of our program to build capacity for modern commuter trains in the country. It was a 53 billion rand program. We did that. And let me tell you that if you've got the Gautrain system, you've got the Metro Rail system, they're equivalent. Same standards, same safety standards, good passenger information on those systems. People can hang out of doors. The speed on those trains are good. So you've got a very reliable fleet. I'm disappointed because one of my disappointments is to see that we are not rolling out these new trains at the rate and the speed at which we wanted to do. We also bought what we call modern locomotives, the ones that I heard people saying that they are too tall for the network. I've read Peter Louis Merbeck writing that these are too tall for the network. These locomotives are the best locomotives in the world that we brought to our country. We bought 3.5 billion rands, and if you look at, for example, their energy efficiencies, they start with diesel, but they change to auxiliary power when they get into motion. If you look at their performance through tunnels, if you look at the horsepower, if you look at the operating cost of those locomotives. But yes, we listen to 55 million people. I always say this: 55 or 57 million South Africans read an article about toll trains. Everyone believed this story. No one even checked toll in relation to what. We've got railway standards. They're not set by PRASA or Lucky Montana. The railway standards are set by the South African Bureau of Standards. And it's very clear, it explains the standards. And by the time the board of PRASA decided to take out these locomotives out of the system, claiming that they're too tall, there was corruption, South Africans do not know that they've traveled through the length and breadth of our country. They've done over 76,000 kilometers. When people left for the North Sea Jazz Festival in Cape Town, they travel on these locomotives. They are the ones who pull the trains to Cape Town and back again. The trains move from here to Mahikeng. They move from here to Bloemfontein, to East London, throughout the length and breadth of the country. They went through bridges, through tunnels. I've never had a single day where they say any of these trains, they hit a tunnel or because they're too tall. So the story was false because it was part of the narrative by greedy leaders. Because when they couldn't get their way at PRASA, they started fighting. I mean, you will not believe it. We also brought the modern signaling system. If you go to Kalfontein, we built what you call the Gauteng Nerve Center. We're starting to bring what we call electronic interlocking systems so that our railways do not use the old signaling system, but they use the what is it called, the modern signaling interlocking systems. Why do you need a modern signaling system? It's because it's good for the capacity of the system. If you want to move away from having a train every 20 minutes, you want to have a train every 3 minutes in a peak hour, your signaling system must be as modern as you want it to be. If you want to reduce accidents on your system, your signaling is important. So it's important for the safe movement of trains on the network. We did. We created a master plan. We appointed Siemens to build the system here in Gauteng. We appointed Bombardier in Durban. Of course, Bombardier failed. I'm told that they didn't complete the project. And we appointed Thales in the Western Cape. We committed over 7 billion rands out of that. But the overall signaling modernization was going to cost 18 billion rand in the country. All of those, when Popo Molefe and his gang were appointed to run PRASA, they put everything and they said there's corruption. I'll tell you today that when we started with that program, we saw the passenger numbers going up. Today, when I left PRASA, and some people say, and it's contained in reports, in graphs and everything, Metro Rail was able to do over 540 million passenger trips, which means over 50 million passenger trips a month. Today, it is doing just less than 200 million. 5 years down the line, it means it has lost over 70% of its ability. It runs far fewer trains. Why? Because Popo came in there and they cancel each and every contract and say, these contracts belong to Lucky Montana. All these contracts are corrupt. They stopped everything. And we saw within a period of 5 years, a system that was solid. Yes, it was not yet modern. It was in the process of modernization. But we saw massive reverses. So I think politics sometimes can destroy a country. And we've seen in our railways, our government took some very bold decisions in the 1990s. And I happen to have the privilege of implementing some of those decisions. And 10 years down the line, we can't show anything for this thing, precisely because our politicians, our greedy politicians, if they can't have their way, then they're going to destroy it. So they thought they're destroying me. They're chasing me, talking about toll trains. They're not toll trains. South Africans should ask themselves some difficult questions. How can 55, 57 million South Africans, they read one article that PRASA bought toll locomotives? And all of us, we don't ask difficult questions. Parliament doesn't invite experts and say, come and tell us how this happened. Everybody believes it. Popo Molefe goes to court and says, we want to cancel the contract because one of the reasons is because these locomotives are not suitable for the network. But these locomotives were traveling, before they were cancelled, they were in the network for over a period of a year. They've accumulated over 76,000 kilometers. Which bridge? Because if you go to Cape Town, you must ask how many bridges you pass. These locomotives never hit a single bridge. The tallest tunnel, the longest tunnel rather, is in the Western Cape. The Afro 4000, which is the locomotive that we're talking about, it passes, unlike current locomotives, it passes those tunnels with ease, without losing fresh air into its own engine, and it's able to perform higher than all the locomotives that we have today. Today they're parked in Braamfontein. People who leave the rural areas to come and buy food or stock in Johannesburg, they've been denied of the opportunity to make livelihoods because the long distance services has grinded to a halt. I read in the newspaper that PRASA, I first read, of course, a report by the DG of Transport. He was telling Parliament that the trains were never toll after all. And I read the recent report. PRASA is negotiating with the manufacturer of those locomotives to bring them back because they want to revive their long distance services, as it were. Now the cost of that, no one is held accountable. Because at that time it was easy. Tell the media that Lucky bought toll trains. And we saw Twitter, everybody being excited. How dumb can Lucky be with his engineer Daniel Mtimkulu buying toll trains or buying trains that do not fit the network? The same people who traveled on the same locomotives, they don't ask themselves, but We went to the Jazz Festival in Cape Town. We traveled on these locomotives. We went to East London, we went to Mahikeng, we went to Polokwane, we went to Durban using the same locomotives. But we believe somebody saying, no, they're too tall. They're not suitable for the... We don't even go to South African Bureau of Standards. Somebody doesn't even ask that the rail safety regulator, the custodian of our rail, of our safety standards in the country, had given PRASA the approval that you can operate these lines on some of the corridors. So I think this has to do with us as a people. We are quick to judge. We are quick to find, our starting point is to find fault rather than deal with the real issues and look what is in the interest of the country. The biggest losers on this false story about toll trains, it's not Lucky Montana, it's not Popo Molefe. It's the people who travel between our urban centers and the rural areas. They've been denied of their livelihood. And I think the sooner as a country we stop this madness, the better for all of us. I mean, when PRASA brings the same locomotives that I bought 10 years ago, they were told 10 years ago, today they're short. What happened? The same locomotives. So they were told yesterday when like you are CEO, and then today somebody runs it, suddenly they shrink. It's not funny. Because as South Africans, I think that it's about time that when we read the story, we don't accept what is being said. I was saying to Peter Louis Myback, I said, I'm going to the Zondo Commission. One of the things I'm dealing with the railway standards to show the false story about these toll trains, these toll locomotives.
Now, Mr. Montana, before we go deep into the other issues involving the Zondo Commission, as well as PRASA and Popo Molefe as the chairperson of the board at the time, can we just expand a little bit further on this new fleet of locomotives that were purchased under your leadership? I read in one of your articles that as the train moves, it would generate its own power, which would eventually be contributed to the national grid of Eskom and supply electricity. Can you tell us a little bit about that? Because honestly speaking, it's something that I never saw in the media. In fact, I'm surprised because in another article you wrote, you also mentioned that even journalists were invited to have a look at this new fleet of locomotives.
Well, we didn't invite journalists to have a look. We invited them to travel on the locomotive. That's the first thing that we did. And the person who I asked to be put in the driver's cap was Peter Louis Myback. And I made a joke. I say, you must put on a, what is it called, a helmet, so that when the train, the toll locomotive hits a bridge, you don't get injured. So these locomotives are perfect. The commuter trains, which are different, which is the trains for metro rail, the technology is amazing there. But we had a separate project to support both of this because, you know, a train in its braking moment generates a lot of energy. And we're interacting with a number of countries, including China, to say how do we capture the braking moment so that we can save that energy for our use in our system, and if we have access, to sell to the national grid. Many railway companies are doing that. It's an important part of the modernization that we have for our own railways. So the fleet that we bought, if you look on the metro rail side, the fleet that the president went to when the president went to open that factory, that fleet will serve our country for the next 40 years, at least for the next 40 years. If it's maintained properly, and if we do what we call general overhauls and extend the life of those trains, you'll see that they can actually serve the country for another 15 years. So it means generally our investment in that 53 billion rands is not like a car. You buy it for 5 years. It will serve the country for the next 55 years if it's properly maintained, if there are general overhauls and upgrades in the right way in that system. We bought the best system. Okay? Popo Molefe and Werksmans, when they started, their first project they had to look at, they were trying to investigate how we bought these new trains. They thought they'll find massive corruption. There was no more than corruption. And today I actually smile and get happy Every time I drive in Pretoria, closer to Loftus, when I visit my parents' home, there's a nice bridge there where the How train and the new commuter trains move next to each other. And I sit there and smile and say, at least my children and my grandchildren will see in 50 years' time, they'll see these blue trains. Minister Mbalula said he doesn't like the blue color. There's a reason for the blue color that we chose. But this is what we've created. And I think I may not be there today because this is not about Lucky Montana, it's about the country. We should abandon this practice that if Lucky Montana is involved, or if you are there, Thabo, today, and I come in, I try to destroy what we have. We have invested. There was no corruption in that. That is why the president takes investors and say one of the major things we have done as a country is to invest in. And I say, look throughout. There's no one who have built a modern factory than during my time. That factory we initiated during my time. But it's not about me, it's about the country. It was about the fact that our government says we want an industrial strategy that will promote local manufacturing, sourcing of local material, and make sure that we build our own economy. We have done it. And 53 billion rand. Somebody internationally writes a report about our rolling stock program. You know what they say? They say one of the best government programs we've ever seen in the world. I travel to Europe, I travel to the US, I travel to the East. They say you South Africans have set the standard on how to manage the acquisition of rolling stock. I'm told by people all over the world. And I land in OR Tambo International Airport. As I leave the airport, the headline, corruption at PRASA, toll trains. Completely different world. Eh? The world sees something in us which we cannot see in ourselves. And I think as a people we need to change. We need to change ourselves. We need to look at the world. People make mistakes. I made so many mistakes as a CEO. There's no doubt about it. I've trusted a lot of people. I've made some decisions that with hindsight I will not repeat those decisions. But there's one mistake that we didn't do. We set the material basis of a modern rail system, a train system of the future. Popo and his gang, they disrupted that. They tried to destroy that, but it's not possible. And I think that when I see the blue train, the blue commuter trains, I see the factory there, I see these locomotives that they're trying to bring back despite claims that they were tall. I know that we've done. When I pass Galfontein, I see a massive facility for the control of the movement of trains. In the past, we couldn't see a train in the east or in the south of Johannesburg at the same time. And sometimes you say, Thabo, there's a train coming, you must authorize it. Today you have got one center that is able that uses modern technology to facilitate the movement of trains. So our modernization program is what it is. It was a bold, ambitious program, and I'm glad that government recognized that. But also I was surprised that when lies were told about toll trains, cabinet, parliament didn't call people and say, hey, how is it possible that we could buy toll trains, and start to question that. They accepted something that was being said in the media which was false and became part of our national position. They went to the Hawks, SIU, investigate this thing. So false. We spend so much energy as a country on wrong things. But our modernization program is not too late. It can still be harnessed to save the country. I was asked in Parliament, would you be available to help? I'm still repeating it. I'm available to help. I'm not asking for a job. But if people ask me, a lot of people from PRASA, they still talk to me and say, how can we do this? What do you think? And these are my former colleagues. We talk a lot. So I'll contribute. I don't want to be a CEO. I don't think I want to be a CEO of anything. after my experiences in PRASA and the lies and the dishonesty of our own leaders who wanted money, and when they couldn't get money, they spoke about corruption. But I think I've passed that stage. But I must contribute to the development of our country. I live here, my children live here, my grandchildren will grow up in South Africa. So I've got a duty to use my knowledge, my expertise to contribute to a better South Africa, a South Africa of our dreams, a South Africa that I know my children and grandchildren should live under. And therefore, I'll use my energies. I'm not angry with anyone. I think we've made a mistake, but the one mistake we didn't do is to try to modernize our railway system. I think it was a good decision. It was a good strategy. And I hope the Minister of Transport will use these energies to make sure that we accelerate that process, so that, because we said by 2025, South Africa will be boosting of one of the best railway systems in the world. But we've reversed all of that because of, as I said, the madness of people like Popo Molefe. But again, I think that we need to move forward. Popo is part of the past. I'm part of the past in the railways, but we need to contribute positively towards a better future.
Now, Mr. Montana, before we move on from the issue around the locomotives, there was also a scandal about financial irregularity of 42 million rands for toilets that could not even feed. Please clarify that before we move on. I really want to hear from you.
Well, you know, we live in a period of madness. Somebody writes a report and say PRASA bought toilets for 42 million. It becomes a headline. It's not a factual thing. Actually, the locomotives that they were referring to, that they were going to install these toilets, they don't even have a toilet. I challenge the journalists and say, can you ask Popo Molefe to take you to those locomotives and see any of these toilets? It was not a toilet, it was a toilet seat costing 42 million. What has happened there is that the operating guys, when the trains were, the designs were being made and the locomotives were being developed, they asked that they prefer to have toilets in the thing. Now, our engineers pointed out that if you have to retrofit a toilet system, you have to change a lot. The cost of changing all of that will be 42 million because you have to shift cables and all sorts of things in the locomotive. Not that so they leaked the report to the media, and the guy, this journalist, who didn't even have time to read and understand, he wrote toilets seats for 42 million. There was no such a thing. The locomotives do not have toilets. We never bought toilets for 42 million rands. That is false. You can check these locomotives. But it's in 2018, by the way, when I was in Parliament, I said, we're told that there are 42 million rand toilets that we bought. There's no such a toilet. And I wanted Parliament to go and investigate for itself. Because people repeat these lies with the hope that one day they'll become true. But you see, I've been writing a lot. I'm at home, I write a lot, and I challenge these things. I even said to the journalist, why don't you also, I've gone to Parliament to defend my story. You also come to Parliament. But the journalist will not go to Parliament or to Zondo Commission and defend his story about toll trains. You know what? Because it's false. It was based on a leak from Popo Molefe and Werksmans. It was not based on a fact. He cannot go and defend that story. Okay? I'm going to go to Zondo. You know, I've given Judge Zondo, Deputy Chief Justice, a very detailed thing. One of the longest sections of my submission is about the so-called toll trains. I deal with the standards, how they were bought, the bid process, and all of the things that were there. And after I've testified on those, I want someone to come and say, like he's telling a lie, to challenge the facts that I put in there. No one will go in there. And I know that the evidence leaders at the Zondo Commission will not even want me to talk about that, or they're going to focus on other things, but the real issues they want to put aside. But for me, I've got the energy to repeat. You know, I operate like a wild dog. You know how a wild dog operates? When it's chasing prey, keeps on running with this thing. It keeps on running until that thing gets tired and it catches it. When the late Xolani Gwala, Perpetua, interviewed Popo in 2015, interviewed Popo and I concluded the interview by saying to Popo Molefe, you're going to win the battle, but you're going to lose the war. I'm going to the Zondo Commission. I'm going to deal, of course, my main focus is not on Popo Molefe or on people. I'm going to the Zondo Commission to tell the story, the true story of our railways, the true story of PRASA, this ambitious program that we've put in place so that we can create a better transport system for the country. But I can't avoid, because of the way the Commission operates, that people have made false allegations. And I'm dealing with each one of those and I provide the details. That is why I've taken time to write a detailed thing so that I don't take shortcuts. And I'm hoping, Popo Molefe said there was a Bramfontein depot, there was corruption. I provided all the evidence there. The Commission will have to tell me this is the corruption that we find. There's currently a liquidation of Sefambo. You know what the liquidators are? They've provided the flow of money, the financial statements. They show how the money was spent. I hear Justice Zondo, a Deputy Chief Justice rather, saying there's a 3.5 billion rand money that was wasted. We didn't even pay 3.5 billion rands. We paid 2.6 billion rands for these locomotives they claim are toll. If you look at the breakdown of that 2.6, 1.9 billion rands of that amount went directly to building these trains. 300 million of that amount went to SARS. So the only amount that they're talking about is 400 million, which went to the directors of Sefambo. And the liquidators never said, well, some of this money was paid to PRASA board members or CEO. There's no such a thing. Yet when you read, when you listen to the judges, you listen to everybody, you listen to the newspapers, it was one of the most corrupt deals. Who approved it? It was approved by Lucky Montana. Now, Lucky Montana didn't even have the authority to approve any contract over 100 million rands at PRASA. Anything over 100 million was approved by the board. Okay? Sefambo was not given a contract behind the scene. There was a competitive bidding process where companies were invited to tender. There was a what we call request for information, RFI. 26 companies put their names and say, we're interested in this thing. We think that we can provide, because that was part of testing the market. When the request for proposals was issued, 6 companies put their bids. One of them was Sefambo. But we were told that it was a corrupt deal. No evidence is being provided. We are only told it's corrupt because some people say it's corrupt, but they cannot provide. And I'm hoping that when you go before Deputy Chief Justice Zondo, I'll be presented with the evidence around all of those things. But from where I sit, I think that we've had one of the great programs. I think if our leaders can forget that Lucky was at the helm and build on what we have done, I think that would be far today. I said when I left in 2015, we were on the threshold of a major railway revolution. Today, we've gone back to the period after 1992. It's sad, it's tragic, it's costly, and no one is held accountable for destroying what the country has achieved thus far.
Now, you've mentioned the State Capture Commission. Now, do you think you'll be given a fair trial there?
No. I think that I've written a lot. People thought that I'm attacking Deputy Chief Justice Raymond Zondo. I don't think it's fair. I think that I wrote. I was never invited by the commission. I wrote to Deputy Chief Justice. I said I was the CEO of PRASA. I've got information within my personal knowledge about what happened at PRASA. I want to share that with you. Actually, I'm not even starting with PRASA. I'm starting from my time as a chief director at the Department of Public Enterprises about restructuring of state-owned enterprises. I deal with my period as Deputy Director General in the Department of Transport. I deal with my period as a CEO of the South African Rail Commuter Corporation before we formed PRASA. So I said, Deputy Chief Justice, I'm available to do that. I met with the Commission's legal and investigating teams. We discussed, we shared, they also indicated to me what we wanted. When I gave them my first draft, they told me that no, this is outside the terms of reference. Don't talk about so and so, don't talk about this. It's outside of and we knew that was false. And I wrote letters to the Deputy Chief Justice. Because if you look at some of the people, the evidence leaders, these were people who were working for Werksmans, who were writing papers for Werksmans, who were consulting for Werksmans. And they become evidence leaders at the Commission. Deputy Chief Justice issued orders. The problem, of course, that I see with him is that he forgets that he's a chairperson of the Commission. And that even his legal and investigating teams must justify themselves. But he seems to be accepting everything that they say to him. They control him. They shape the agenda. They also select what items must go to him. And if you even when you follow the media, look at the testimony of recent testimony of Dudumieni. When she was saying certain things, the media out there was not reporting on those things. The only thing they kept on showing you say, I do not want to incriminate myself. Okay? So they sift information, they select. So I'm very direct. I'll repeat it to Deputy Chief Justice. I'll tell him that he's pursuing a predetermined agenda. I mean, one of the examples he says, I'll give two. He says, Lucky Montana bought properties. He said, for how much? 30 million rands. And he gives that laughter of his. He asked these guys, they go, no, 36 million. I never bought properties for 36 million. Where do I get 36 million rand from? Because the Commission takes information from Werksmans and from Paul O'Sullivan and say, Lucky Montana is involved with these people and therefore all these properties are his properties. Properties that are not in my name. I'm on record, here are my properties, here are properties that belong to other people. And here are the partnerships that I've been involved in. This has got nothing to do with PRASA. It has to do with me being involved in the property environment. Raymond Zondo, our Deputy Chief Justice, was putting that as a fact. He's already formed an opinion even before he hears my testimony, what I've got to say about that. Deputy Chief Justice blasted the the Hawks and the National Prosecution Authority and say, look at the facts that the PRASA has presented to you. And you've done nothing about this thing. You must act on. He hasn't even reviewed the information. In my submission, I'm actually showing that the Hawks had written to PRASA saying, but you are giving us vague statements. We want evidence. If you say Lucky Montana has done this, give us the evidence. What he has acted on. But no, they couldn't provide all of that. Popo goes to court to try and force the Hawks to act in the way that he prefers. Popo writes to, at that time, the head of the NPA, Sean Abrahams, and saying, I want these people to be charged for the following crimes. And Sean Abrahams responds, I present that letter to the Commission, says, no, but that's not how we work. We must investigate first and be guided by evidence. Because they were pursuing a vendetta. They were fighting against me, so they wanted me to be prosecuted. They even told the Hawks that you do not have capacity. We want you to appoint one of our companies to do the work so that they can write a script for us. Now, Deputy Chief Justice hasn't seen that information. Yet he's actually using strong words, hitting the table. Why are the Hawks not acting? Why is the NPA not acting when such overwhelming evidence has been presented? There's no such overwhelming evidence. It's not there. But he listened to the testimony of Popo Molefe, and you know what he says? He praises him. And I don't have a problem when Popo is praised. He says, I wish South Africa could have men like you. And I sit there and I laugh. Actually, that day, I attended to listen to Popo's testimony. I went. He praised Popo Molefe.
So you were present?
I was present. I listened to the Deputy Chief Justice. Let me tell you, and I'll repeat it at the commission. Popo Molefe is one of the most corrupt leaders you'll ever find. You have to read I write in detail about the things he did at PRASA, about the things he's doing currently at Transnet.
Now,
Let me make this. I detail that. You ask yourself, Deputy Chief Justice, he hasn't heard the full story. He's praising this man. Okay? He hasn't heard. So, I'm not yet there. It's going to be very difficult for me to convince because this powerful man, Deputy Chief Justice, is going to find it difficult to say, hey, I was wrong. Okay? But I presented evidence. I can come with a litany of these issues where he was making conclusive statements that are not based on fact. Because he believes all of us, you see, the problem with the Deputy Chief Justice and his commission, because they've taken sides, because they're being used in the battles that are taking place in the country. They believe that there are good people and there are bad people. Guys like me fall in the category of bad people. So we are guilty even before we go to the commission. Our job is to go and plead for leniency. But let me make it very clear, I'm not one person to do that. I'm going to walk to the Zondo Commission. I'll be walking tall. And, I don't even need my statement. I know this thing left, right, and I was involved in it. I was at the center of the establishment of PRASA and the restructuring of our railways in the 1990s. I understand it's why if we do this thing will not happen, or vice versa. What are the trade-offs that we required? So, it's our Deputy Chief Justice. We've got to show him the respect. Is he fair? No, it's not fair. Has he taken sides? Yes, he has taken sides. Is he pursuing a predetermined agenda? Yes, he is. Other people say, but if you don't believe in his fairness, why do you go? The commission doesn't belong to Deputy Chief Justice Zondo. It belongs to us, the people of South Africa. And I'm going to place evidence there. And of course, he's going to make his decision. If he hates me, I don't like to. For me, you see, the one thing is that I don't want people to like me. I'm not in a modeling contest to be liked by this one. I put things for what they are. I'm going to say it. I'll be very close to him. When I told him in a letter that he's not God, I was not saying it because I was at my house, he was far from me. When I repeat it, Deputy Chief Justice, this commission has got huge implications for the future of our country. And your report, the way you're going to write, it will have a huge impact whether ultimately we're going to be a united nation or you're going to continue to reproduce the divisions that we see today. So yes, you must hold people accountable. People like Lucky Montana, Brian Molefe must be held accountable for the decisions that we've made. That I don't have a problem with. But if you use the commission to pursue, Werksman's attorneys, for example, you must read my testimony, my statement. They've done a lot of wrong things. Okay? They've even appropriated to themselves the functions of a modern state. They say in their reports that they are going to conduct surveillance on individuals and entities. Now, that is only by law. It's supposed to be done by our intelligence services. Okay? We are dealing with state capture. Deputy Chief Justice says, no. This is outside the terms of reference of the commission. So, I'm criticizing the Deputy Chief Justice for valid reasons. And I hope, I said in one of my statements that when he look at themselves in a mirror, he would realize that he has actually done a great injustice, not to me, not to other people, but to the justice system. Because as a person who administers justice, he's got a duty. If I write a letter to him, he's got a duty to answer to me, not his legal team, him as a chair of the commission. And he's failed to do all of those things. So I'm very specific, I'm very direct. I think Deputy Chief Justice is not fair. I think he's extremely biased. He's pursuing an agenda. And if he wants us on the first day of the commission for me to demonstrate that 20 pages of my own testimony, I deal with his own bias, with the way he's done wrong things in that commission. Let me give you a final example of this bias. There's a guy who's involved in a partnership in a property deal with me. This guy, he signs an affidavit to the commission. He says, no, I've got a deal with Lucky. It's a good business deal. You know what the commission does? They invite people who talk bad things about me. That guy, they shift him and say, no, don't come and testify. Okay? So we see these things. So do I believe in Deputy Chief Justice? At the beginning, I thought it was only his legal teams and his investigating teams that were wrong. As I'm sitting here answering your questions, I actually believe that the problem is with him.
Do you therefore think he must be recused? Sorry. Do you therefore think he must be recused?
Well, I wrote in my statement, I actually fall short of doing that. Because I believe he has made this mistake, like all of us. He should be given an opportunity. But I retain the right to call for that because I've actually provided the details. I've made a case why he should recuse himself. Do I want him to recuse himself? You know, I watched two things by Deputy Chief Justice Raymond Zondo. I watched when he was being interviewed for this position in the JSC. You remember that interview? I think he even shed a tear. Right. And I watched his speech when he paid tribute to Bram Fischer. And I watched that because I like Bram Fischer as an Afrikaner, a communist, and one of the top legal minds in the country. I watched his lecture on that. He inspired me. Deputy Chief Justice. I say, here's a man committed to justice. But after my experience in a period of about 8 months, I realized that here's a man who's lost his sense of justice and fairness. I'm going to that commission with that view. Whether he likes me, I know that they're planning now, my own intel tells me that they're planning to harass and humiliate me when I go to the commission. It's not going to happen. Let me tell you now, you guys probably, by the time you fly this thing on your program, this interview, let me tell them, it's not going to happen. Maybe they can do it with other people. They don't know me. So I think if Deputy Chief Justice wants to deal with me based on readings in the newspapers, he's making a very serious mistake. But I'm going there. I'm committed to assist the commission in its work. But yes, as I'm sitting here, I don't believe that he's fair. I think he's biased. He's pursuing an agenda and he's trying to protect some vested interest. And you can't have a Deputy Chief Justice who acts in that way. So there is a case for him to recuse himself. But I don't think I've gone to that extent. I'm hoping that as a human being, as a father, as an African elder, he will reflect. He'll still have the opportunity to reflect, and maybe it will happen not now. It will happen when he writes his report and say, have I taken a really balanced view? Have I looked at the facts dispassionately? Have I analyzed this evidence, or have I allowed myself to be pushed and to to respond to what the so-called popular media, established media, are saying, because he seems to be afraid to be criticized by the established media, and I think you can't occupy that position if you are afraid. So I know I've taken long to answer this question, but I wanted to elaborate so that you understand that we are not saying these things because we hate the man. I don't know him. I'm happy that he's a Deputy Chief Justice. Abantu bamzalayo bakaZondo noNkulunkulu are the ones who preferred him to be there. But he also must also understand that, like he's born from by the Zondos, I also I'm a child of someone. I deserve the same fairness, the same opportunity that he's had. He can't judge me. He's not God. That's the bottom line. And I'm not going to the commission to justify myself, to clear my name. That's not why I'm going to the commission.
All right, so Mr. Montana, before we go into discussing your relationship in particular with Mr. Molefe as, former executives at PRASA, I want you to just, tell South Africans who don't really understand what you mean by saying that there are attempts to curtail some of your information on the submissions you made to the Zondo Commission. You even highlighted in that letter that the Commission's work is to actually inquire, to make findings and recommendations thereof. And now you complain that some information from your letter was actually removed. They do not want to entertain that. Can you please tell us, sitting here, and all people watching out there, what exactly that information is that they do not want you to touch on?
Well, it's about the irregular appointment and the unlawful and corrupt appointment of Werksman's attorneys. And we know Werksman's attorneys and the system that they work, companies like Basileas Consortium Professional Services, Ukozi, that works with people like Ivan Pillay, Johan van Lochrenberg. These are network. When Pete Rampedi and Mzilikazi wa Africa wrote about, and other people in the Sunday Times wrote about the SARS rogue unit, people said they're telling lies. We have seen it in operation at PRASA. I detail how they were irregularly and unlawfully appointed. But not only their unlawful and corrupt appointment, I deal with what they did, which is surveillance. And I'm saying legally they're not entitled to do that. It's actually against the law. I detailed that in my statement. They're not prepared to say, no, cut it out. I spoke about the role of Minister Pravin Gordhan. Because in my statement, I detailed his role. Pravin Gordhan tells us about good people, bad people. He tells us about corrupt people. I detail his role. He only went to tell Zondo about what he wanted to tell Zondo. He never spoke about his role. If there's one person who is at the center of the collapse of PRASA after I've left, number one is Pravin Gordhan. Number two is Werksman's attorneys. Number three is Basileas Consortium Professional Services, BCPS, under Warren Goldblatt. Number four is Ukozi Forensics, which is owned by Mohammed Sidat, but which uses two intelligence officers who were at SARS. One on the side of the democratic movement, of the liberation movement, Ivan Pillay. And the other side, on the apartheid side, Johan van Lochrenberg. These are the people who destroyed PRASA. And they had their ball boy, Popo Molefe, who was implementing their own decisions. My testimony deals with this in great detail. And that is why they don't want me to come to the commission. Because we've been made to believe that the Guptas, I fought with the Guptas. I chased the Guptas when they came closer to PRASA. But I also chased our own people in the ANC. Your Pravin Gordhan, your Popo Molefe, your Zweli Mkhize. That's why they hate me. And that is why they try to write stories about me and all of those things. But you see, it's not up to Justice Zondo. It's up to me. And let me tell you, Tabu, will Justice Zondo invite me? I think my timeline is now coming to an end. I'm going to go to the Zondo Commission with my files and insist on testifying when I'm not invited. Mark my words, I'll go to the commission to testify. Even if Justice Zondo, I'll go there and I'll stand there. Maybe he'll call the police and the security to pull me out. But I'll do that every day until the day he invites me. And they're not going to channel the way what I'm going to say. I'm going to say, I say what Steve Biko used to say, I write what I like. I've written what I wanted to write in my test statement, and I'll answer the questions. What they've done now, I also deal with the role of SARS. Because if you understand Pravin Gordhan, you understand Ivan Pillay, Johan van Lochrenberg, you also understand that criminal we call Paul O'Sullivan. They use SARS. SARS is currently tearing me into pieces. We've read in newspapers how they attach my properties to sell them because I owe them 1.8 million, not for criminality. Because I owe money from a capital gains, I've sold properties that, and I said to SARS, I even gave them, my lawyers gave them an undertaking that I've now sold the property. I'm prepared to pay them. They went ahead. You know what they did with my properties before it was auctioned? It was broken into pieces. They chopped it into pieces so that whoever buys, if we say 10 million, say, how can I pay 10,000 for this thing which is broken? I'd rather pay 1,000 rand. I had properties, assets, furniture, which was over 2 million rand in my house. They broke it into pieces. They gave some of my stuff, and they even invited a journalist to write like his music, books. You remember that piece? Because they want to humiliate you and everything. But some of us are made differently. We can't be broken. Actually, when somebody comes and breaks your furniture, you work for something. You buy a marble table or you buy a mirror that they themselves cannot afford. And they become jealous. They think that you bought it because it's corrupt, and they break it so that when it goes to auction, it can collect less than what it is. My furniture will not have collected less than 500,000, excuse me, 500,000. But they broke it. I sent somebody, they say, go take pictures, and they send me pictures. So you've got your tax collecting agencies working with agendas, working in a criminal way. I never denied that I owed SARS money. It's not a crime to owe SARS money. People owe SARS and they make arrangements to pay. But with me, they didn't want to make even any arrangement. They made it very clear. So we're not interested. We either want the money or want your head. So I deal with these things in my testimony. You see, the problem with when you have criminals like this, and we're having these interviews, the biggest issue in the country is about the arrest of Ace Mahashule and him being charged on Friday. Once you do things like this, yes, we must be held accountable. But once you abuse these institutions, we've seen it. We've seen it with SARS. I've given you just one example of how they do it. Companies that Werksmans, through its surveillance activity, had identified at PRASA. They've identified the number of people and companies. Okay? These companies have been subjected to repeat audits. So you come, you supply information, SARS say not good enough, we want this. When you supply this, they go back 10 years back. Not because SARS said these people have done wrong, because they're being investigated by Werksmans. They are being subjected to a surveillance activity. And therefore SARS takes them. I fire a guy at PRASA by the name of VM Lenzani. VM Lenzani was the acting CEO of our long distance services, Shosholoza Mail. I go on leave in December. He remains behind, and long distances during festive seasons are busy. The long distance trains and buses. Viewer pushes junior employees. He's on leave, but he tried to force employees, junior employees in finance, to pay a certain company, and he's caught. He goes through a disciplinary thing, and ultimately he's dismissed. Or rather, there's a recommendation that he must be demoted. The report comes to me that I must demote someone who's a CEO. I said, but it can't be. If it was a junior employee, you would have fired this person already. Here's a CEO who steals, who knows the policies of the company, who colludes with outside companies and pressurizes. He's in a position of trust. And I said the recommendation that he must be demoted can never be acceptable to me. He should be fired. And then he gets fired. Of course, he goes to court. The court says, you shouldn't have fired him. You should have demoted him as recommended. It's a recommendation to me. But they say, so it's fine. The court says he must be reinstated to reach agreement. He's paid. Then he gets work at SARS as a compliance officer. You know what he does in that position? He then says he uses, because his job as a SARS compliance officer or whatever it is to chase people like me. And he says, yes, I got the opportunity. And they're not playing with me. They basically said that they want to see me without shoes. So if this is not abuse of our institutions, we must ask us, what is it? The problem with that kind of an approach, it destabilizes our country, because you know what happens? People forget that you are not in power forever. I can't be CEO of PRASA for the rest of my life. Cyril is not going to be president for the rest of his life. If he's lucky, then he's going to have 2 terms. What happens afterwards? A new grouping of people comes in. You know what they're going to do? They're going to chase these chaps. So we're going to have a cycle. What happens to the needs of our people out there? So we're going to spend even the next 10 years fighting, because these ones, when they come in, they use these institutions to fight their battles. I write about Paul O'Sullivan in my thing. You know, a lot of people fear Paul O'Sullivan. He writes me a letter, and I said to him, but I'm not interested in you. You're actually one of the biggest criminals and the #1 crook in the country. Because Paul O'Sullivan, I've stated in my evidence. In fact, I gave that information to our intelligence services, to state security some years back. Paul O'Sullivan, if you are having a problem with the law or with SARS, he comes there and says, I'm going to solve your problem, but you must pay. That is his modus operandi. And why is he able to solve this thing? Because he's got direct links with people at SARS, with direct links. You must ask yourself, why are companies paying Paul O'Sullivan? Is Zondo prepared to subpoena his accounts for all his companies and see who's putting money and ask him to come and explain why people are paying money to him? Because Paul O'Sullivan extorts money from people. He hates me because I tell him, I call him an Irish extortionist. I said it in black and white. He hates me. All the stories that Zondo commissions talk about my properties, they're coming from Paul O'Sullivan. He wanted money from one of the companies. I came to know about it. He wanted 50 million to save this guy. I said, you're not going to pay 50 million. Paul O'Sullivan must go to hell. So, you could see that the Zondo Commission doesn't want that evidence. Okay? It's outside the terms of reference. This is absolute criminality. The abuse of our own state institutions like SARS, like the Hawks. Not by the Guptas as they claim, but this new crowd that is running the country today. And we are expected to keep quiet. So I'm going to the commission to talk about these things. So Thabo, you are asking me, am I afraid? You know, I respect people. But I don't fear another human being. So I'm going to the commission, and I hope that the Deputy Chief Justice gives me the space and the opportunity to present my evidence. But if it doesn't, I'll force it. I know that I'll force it. It's going to happen. Because I force things. I do force things. And I think that when that day arrives, you can't hide behind technicalities. I'll be there. And I'm looking forward. I hope he's going to invite me, or I'm going to be at the commission with my bag every day to be given an opportunity to speak. So I'll speak inside the commission and outside of the commission.